So in my teenage years, I've always been hit with the comment of, well, you don't act black. Or like even some non-black people saying that they would act blacker than me. And to me, it's just like, what does that even mean? Like my blackness is not defined by the stereotypes that you or people in general just expect black people should have. We are people. We're diverse. There is no one way just to be black.
I learned pretty early on that discrimination did not end with the civil rights movement. It just took on other forms, growing more subtle in the following years. Reverbs of the sundown separationists who kept people of color out of their neighborhoods by policy and threat of violence if necessary. The abandoned veterans of Vietnam who returned to their country shunned by the people and by the government that sent them to fight and die. The demonization of homosexuality and the targeted cruelty during the AIDS epidemic. The incarceration model of black code reformed as the war on drugs, meant to perpetuate slave labor under a carceral state, filling private prisons with non-violent offenders, vagrants, drug addicts, and at times the completely innocent. These occurrences in America's history are only decades apart, and those who caused these atrocities and the people who suffered through them are still alive today. I felt that reverb. The morning my mother, after years of pulling double shifts as a corrections officer, lost her job, pushing me and my two younger siblings out from our nice community in the burbs of Ann Arbor and into the ghettos of Ypsilanti. After a while, we came to recognize the drastic differences in the institutions around us, all so familiar to my mother, but alien to me. The close proximity of smoggy factories, grassroots shops and farmers markets ceded to big chain grocery stores, dollar stores next to the liquor stores, next to the predatory lending company, right next to the military recruitment office. And across the street, a nightclub and a walk-in clinic. Cramped townhomes and projects with barred windows and doors because poverty, crime, and desperation made us afraid of each other. When I was young, I couldn't call this feeling I had for what it was. Hopelessness and contempt for a community devoid of opportunity. The scariest part of all this was that all the people I saw in my neighborhood looked just like me. And I grew angry. We were all angry. We were angry because whoever was running this ship didn't see the value in us. And if the people living here cared enough to want to build value, they were too poor or too poorly equipped to do much about it. Outside of sports, there were no after-school programs or classes on financial literacy or culture and the arts. The cafeterias fed children garbage. The teachers barely made a livable wage and had to show up every day disarmed, one budget cut after another. Kids ran in the streets because there was nothing else for us. And we learned our rights as they were violated by police. The Black Lives Matter movement, braving every manner of obstacle, is by and large a voracious response to generations of unchecked violation. An act of solidarity among the vast spectrum of oppression to trace all the branches of neglect, siphon resources, brutalization of our bodies, shelved legislation, and corporate theft right to its sinister core. It is an effort to desensitize ourselves from the peddled sensationalism of paid-for news sources that pit us against each other as a strategy to keep our focus away from the consequences of an unbridled government that has repeatedly failed to deliver to its masses what it has afforded to a chosen few. It demands accountability from those responsible for its failure. And it's working. It is working. To continue to work, it needs continued action. We're seeing the results of that work in the redistribution of hundreds of millions of dollars to social services in Los Angeles, Louisville's ban on no-knock warrants, and the entire dismantlement of the corrupt Minneapolis Police Department. We are also seeing it in the arrests of officers who murder unarmed, non-threatening citizens. We have called the justice system into question, and we are finally seeing reform. Change is possible. This journey is long and winding, and every sharp turn bears a blind spot for strategies by the media, provocateurs, and day-late virtue-signaling corporations to dismantle the vehicle of strength, which is the American people unified. We are all in this together. We are stronger together. We may not agree on a few things, but we all deserve peace and the power to pursue opportunity without having to forfeit our lives and our dignity. We can continue this momentum by remaining objective, familiarizing ourselves with federal and state ordinance, reading the 1,000-page policies, and discussing them with family and neighbors. Go to your city council meetings. Figure out when they host the virtual meetings and participate. Petition. Get involved. Find who your organizers are and stay in contact. Register to vote. Register to vote by mail, and make sure you know who is on the ballot. Vote in officials who have our interests and hold them accountable. Support research with real-world evidence and scrutinize data without getting swept up in the echo chambers that only exist to affirm our biases. Challenge every school of thought, including your own, while valuing the differences in the people around you so we can stop attacking each other and come to consensus on important issues. Prioritize education. Prioritize healthcare, mental welfare, social work, and housing development. Hold our justice system to the highest of standards, including training our officers in de-escalation. Make them less dependent on lethal response. Dissolve qualified immunity. Endorse systems that invest in our communities, create opportunity for people to expand their scope beyond the ghettos. If people have hope, there will be less chaos and ultimately less need for the police. And above all, prioritize the health of our planet. Because none of this shit matters if we don't have a home to come back to. Black Lives Matter.
Imagine loving something so great. Your country, my country. Imagine that when the national anthem is played, you don't take a knee, you don't sit down, you stand up with a sense of pride that is overwhelming. Because you're American. You're not African American. You're not black. You're American. That's the way I feel when the national anthem is played. But at the same time, imagine something you feel so strongly about that you love so much, you feel that deep down inside that you aren't the same as everybody around you. That you won't get the same treatment as everyone around you. Imagine if you would die for those colors, red, white, and blue. But imagine that your kids, depending on the situation, won't get a fair deal as their counterparts. That's what it's like being American, but Black American. I love everything about my small town country life. But I know outside of here, where no one knows me, I am nothing but another black face. I'll be disrespected with everyone else in the crowd. I'll be mistreated just like anyone else. I love my country. I do. But at the same time, there are people that just hate me just for being. And I didn't ask to be my color. I just gotta live in this skin.
Living in today's society requires tolerance and patience. On one side of the spectrum, you have individuals that awakens every morning to serve the community. On the other side, you have hard workers that's diligently providing a living for themselves and their families. The barrier that separates these two types consists of poverty, racial inequality, police brutality, crime, political corruption, and lack of resources and opportunities. These are the reasons why horrible things are happening within our communities. It's as if no one wants to be held responsible for the negative roles that they are partaking during these catastrophic times. Accountability must strongly be enforced in order to govern both sides. On numerous occasions, I witnessed small children of color be so terrified of the police that they would instantly start crying and shivering in fear. It's as if they have this odd notion that their lives are at risk. The tears alone is what really moves me because I can see it in their eyes that they were terrified. The trust is gone and the bond is broken. Law enforcement has been labeled something treacherous instead of righteous. The crazy part about our society is that we don't know how to control and govern ourselves. It's as if we can't understand the difference between logic and emotion. If we were able to keep our emotions in check, then best believe that we will find logic in the same understanding as our emotions. Our own ignorance and stubbornness as humans is what blocks us from becoming supreme entities of this world. We have to evolve in order to advance. We have to do better to become better. Let's raise our goals and expectations in order to reach higher levels in this existence. For you only get one life to live, so let's put forth the effort and make the best of it.
Hey, my name is Fusion Joseph. I also make art videos. And I'm here to talk about Black Lives Matter. I'm here to talk about the I Can't Breathe campaign. I'm here to talk about, the current social, political climate. I'm here to talk about how things are with, the overall black community, the escalation of events that have kind of led to some negativity, some positivity, some unity, and hopefully some stuff that will last longer than, 6 months, as it tends to usually last. So overall, the whole George Floyd situation, which is a very appalling situation, these kind of things have been happening for a long time, and there has been video evidence, body cam footage. There's been so much things that have shown these things happening so often that a few years ago, me myself as a black man became desensitized. Now, when the George Floyd thing happened, I honestly feel like because of quarantine, we paid more attention. and it became a bigger issue. And it's good that that did happen. Sometimes in history, or in human history in general, we need certain things to align a certain way for us to actually make some kind of a change. And I hope that this incident that has kind of brought everyone together, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone. I mean, it's not just black people. Because originally, when we were saying Black Lives Matter, or when the people in the States were saying Black Lives Matter, people were seeing it as All Lives Matter. People were protesting. And now, that whole All Lives Matter protesting seems to have been abolished. It seems to have been pushed away. Now the focus seems to be back on Black Lives Matter. And that doesn't mean that all lives don't matter, but it means that right now we're trying to focus on something that is happening too often. And we're trying to focus on something that has been a historical issue. My only gripe with this situation is the last time it happened, and we had a very similar campaign. NBA players and stuff were wearing t-shirts that said "I can't breathe," because this did happen to someone else before George Floyd. And a 6-month period went by. Whoever won the championship, blah, blah, blah. These things happen and we forget. And we go back to our daily lives. This unity that we have right now, as far as I'm concerned, is invaluable. And I don't want us to lose this. Not just as black people, as people. There is a unity. People are seeing our plight. Now, I want to kind of wheel it back a little bit. I'm from the UK. In the UK, this kind of police brutality, it does exist, but not in the same way. Why? Because in the UK, police don't have the same weapons that they have in the States, which means that people aren't as obliged to obey the police the same way as they would in the States. Now, police can get weapons if authorized, but for the most part, your everyday beat cop or your everyday cop that walks down the street does not have a weapon. He might have what we call a kosh or a baton, but he doesn't have a gun. So the fear isn't the same. I haven't really experienced that much racism in my own life. I can't act like I have, but I've always kind of been on the straight and narrow. I've always kind of followed a healthy, lawful path, right? I've been mistaken for a drug dealer a few times, but they were mistakes. I've been stopped once. That is the only incident that I was stopped for, and it was my laptop. I was walking on the street to my own house from a friend's house with my laptop. I remember the police stopped me, which was quite suspicious, but I simply typed my password in the laptop and they just left me alone. But those are the only incidents I've ever kind of dealt with the police in the UK. For the most part, the police in the UK have their hands full with a lot of the knife crime stuff that goes on. But other than that, there's obviously, like every other place, there's a drug problem, there's this and that. But for the most part, you don't hear too much about police brutality in the UK. Now, it does exist because police in the UK tend to use excess all the time, right? So they'll send 5 cop cars for one person, things like that. There's a lot of that going on. But direct brutality, I haven't really experienced too much of it myself, and I don't know too much about it myself. And for the most part, I have lived in what you would classify as the hood in the UK, and I haven't seen too much police brutality myself. Thank you for this opportunity to speak, Mike. And I appreciate all of you guys that listened. Peace.
You know, when you are growing up, when you're first learning to communicate with the world around you, you take for granted a lot of different things. You take for granted how hard it is to communicate an idea, you know. And you know, I view things a little bit with a different lens, being a creative, because that you try to value that that communication that you possess, and you hold it as almost as a badge of honor. You can convey things as a creative in many different ways, right? You can be a musician. You can be an amazing illustrator, like what we're seeing on the screen right now, and that can communicate for you, right? But what do you do when you're faced with something so hard to communicate to a person that's never experienced it, right? That doesn't get it, that like's grown up in a way where they've been, for all purposes, like shielded from it in a way, right? That's a hard thing to do, right? Because at some point in time, everyone learns on some level the value of life, how life has affected, how someone's life, I should say, has affected you as a person. That could be with the birth of a baby sister. That could be the death of a grandmother or grandfather. You learn about the frailties of life and the value of life. But how do you communicate the value of another person's life when a whole world doesn't care? What do you do? As a creative, how do you show that, right? As a person, as a regular person, maybe who's not creative, how do you show that? These are like the things I've thought about with seeing my brothers and sisters, die by the hands of needless, insensitive people. They wasted that they wasted that, like, I don't even know how to like explain it. It's just needless people. On some levels, they don't need to be here. They don't need to be seen. They're needless. I don't know. I thought about just kind of talking and trying to get my thoughts out, trying to wrap my head around, what it means to communicate this notion of Black Lives Matter, this notion of equality, this notion of having equity on this, it's a tough thing to talk about. I think this might help others, who are listening to this, and the other people that are on this. I think it starts with communication, and communication can be tough. Communication can be annoying, at times, but we have to keep communicating. And this is just another way of showing someone who has lived sheltered, who maybe is into this type of like these type of videos, and this is another way of putting the subject of Black lives front and center, right? I thank the creator of this video in so many ways of like communicating in a way that's going to reach someone that's maybe not looking at the news. They're maybe not reading the updates on how the process is going, who maybe doesn't know about Breonna Taylor, who maybe doesn't know about George Floyd, and it's kind of hard to understand that, but I'm pretty sure there's people like that just don't know, or don't know by name, right? They know that some guy died, some black guy died, but this is another way of like bringing up the subject, right? It's not going away. I felt the need to say what I'm saying on this, just because it's a way of getting your thoughts out, getting them out there. Yeah, it's a tough thing, but I think it's needed. Black Lives Matter, and we need to not just say it, but start to do, right? You need to find ways. If you're listening to this and you're trying to understand, you're trying to better communicate, like the word I used before, reading up on stuff, understanding the severity of the situation, understanding that this point in time is a crossroads in history, right? This point in time is a time where 20, 30 years from now, people will look back on this moment, these last couple months, and talk about how these things has shaped the country, has shaped the world, and what can you say that you've done? What did you do? What small things you do to help contribute to the cause, right? Outside of like the general tweet, or the Instagram post or the Facebook post or the Facebook argument that you got into, did you protest? Did you go out and walk and march? Did you donate did you try to push for, a better work environment for people of black skin? Did you look around your work and realize that no one looks like George Floyd where you work? And did you like question why that is? And did you try to figure out solutions of how that could be changed? It's not just saying, "Oh no, we don't." It's like, what can you do to change that, right? What can you do to communicate differently? And then put that communication into action. In a lot of ways, this is what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to use my voice to push the conversation fuller and put more stuff into action, put myself out there and so to speak, so that I can feel like I'm contributing in my own ways, So I think that's it, what I wanted to say, but let's communicate with action. Get out there, raise your voice, contribute, donate if that's the way you want to do it, volunteer, be that spark of change. But do something. Do something. Don't let the opportunity pass. It affects everybody.